All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today using Grafana to create this session. Before we get started, let me just go over a few housekeeping items. If you have questions anytime during the webinar, please use the Q&A button to submit them. I'll be answering questions towards the end of the session. We'll be sending out the recording along with the presentation shortly after the webinar. If you need help, use the Q&A button. I will remind myself to check for questions from time to time. A little bit about myself. I started my career as a network engineer. From there, I joined Cisco and began my career in software engineering. Eventually, I ended up in product management. As a product manager, I worked in various areas, including collaboration software, WAN optimization technologies, as well as network performance management. I joined Indeni 5 years ago to take on the responsibility for product management. Agenda for today. I want to start off by doing a little bit of level setting, talk about what Grafana is and why do you even care. Then we'll look at the integration, how it works from a high level. We'll do a demo. And I also want to pop the hood a little bit just so that you can see how it works behind the scene to a point that you would want to do some level of customization. Then we'll take a look at the roadmap, what you can expect in the next, say, 3 to 6 months. And we'll wrap up. What is Grafana? Grafana is an open source visualization and analytics software. It's actually quite popular among enterprises. According to Grafana Labs, they have approximately 800,000 active installations today. That's pretty impressive. The way I like to look at Grafana is it's really a great way to turn your time series data into beautiful graphs. Why Grafana? Today, we collect about 350 unique metrics from your checkpoint devices at various intervals. Some of the metrics, we collect them every hour, some of them every 5 minutes, or it can be as frequent as every minute. We run these scripts continuously, 24/7. If you do the maths, then factor the number of devices that you have in your environment, you could easily get to millions of data points in an hour. That's clearly a lot of data to digest. Now, we humans are very visual. We understand visual information much faster than any other form of information. We like pictures, we like graphs. So using a data visualization tool to make some sense out of all these data points, it's a no-brainer. So years ago, we started our journey to build as many graphs as possible. Meanwhile, we continue to develop new automation scripts and therefore more and more new metrics. It didn't take us that long to realize that we couldn't keep up with the rates of building automation scripts. No doubt that building rules and scripts is our core competency. We simply couldn't build widgets fast enough. That led us down a slightly different path. Why don't we use the right tool for the right job? We were saying to ourselves at the time. Why not leverage external visualization tools? So we started exploring the Indeni Grafana plugin, released a couple of years ago. Some of you might actually remember that. But we didn't see a lot of uptake. Right? Getting the data to a graphing tool is just the tip of the iceberg. The bulk of the work is actually building the widget. That's very time consuming, time that many of you don't have. And that is how we ended up with a hybrid approach. Let us get all the data into Grafana. And we'll do the heavy lifting. We will build every single widget for you, which is what got us here today. Now, the other great benefit of Grafana is its support for countless data sources out of the box. You can have a widget with multiple queries, each one from a different data source, and it doesn't even have to be from Indeni. So what that means is a single pane of glass can actually be reality. How does the integration work? Today, Indeni uses a combination of CLI commands and syslog to grab as many metrics as possible from your checkpoint device. We then store these metrics in our in-memory time series database. We also have a JSON API that you can query any metric in our database. The integration uses the JSON API plugin. This is an open source plugin that ships with Grafana 8.0 or later. In a nutshell, Grafana sends queries against the Indeni server using our API in the backend. The Indeni server responds to the query with a JSON document, and you use popular languages such as JSON Natter and JSON Path to extract the data into Grafana. Let's take a look at the demo. Let me switch over. Okay. So the very first thing you need to do is to start up a Grafana instance and then log into the portal and head over to configuration, data source. This is where you would add the, actually, this is where you would configure the integration. Now, the integration is fairly straightforward. In the interest of time, I just want to point out a couple of gotchas. So first thing you want to do is make sure you call the data source Indeni-API v2. This is because, like all the dashboards will, assumes the data source with that name. So you then configure the Indeni server endpoint and add the certificate information. Now, if you happen to be using a self-signed certificate, go ahead and enable the skip TLS verify option. That way, Grafana wouldn't try to validate your Indeni certificate. And then add a couple of custom HTTP headers. Point out that when you press save and test, you are going to get this message, JSON API not found, but that's okay. The reason you're getting this message is because the Indeni server expects to see the query in certain formats. So once the integration is working, head over to our repository. We are hosting that in Bitbucket, and select a vendor of interest and go ahead and download the JSON file. Once you download that, go back to your Grafana instance and simply imports it into your environment. And once you do that, you're gonna have a device dashboard that looks something just like this. Now, the first thing you'll notice is to bind the JSON files that you just imported into your environment. And they will pick up the list of devices that you have in your installation and allow you to select the particular device that you want to look at. Now you're looking at 90 minutes of data. Now, Grafana uses a concept of roles, and I sometimes calls these tabs. Let me go ahead and expand a few of these tabs. Now, tabs are really a great way to group metrics together that makes sense. Now, each one of these panels, by the way, I call them widgets sometimes. Each one of these panels actually has a metric or even multiple metrics behind it. Our overview tab consists of information about the particular device, what model is running, how long it's been up, basic configuration, like what DNS servers that it's using, hot fixes that have been installed, policy, when it was installed, etc. Let's take a look at the System Resources tab. Now, the System Resources tab getting more interesting. You now can start seeing the time series graphs. It consists of information like you would expect, like load average, CPU usage, disk usage, memory usage, etc. Now, notice the time series graph. When I mouse over it, you actually see the tooltip. You can see the actual value along with the timestamp. And I keep mousing over. Notice that the timestamp increments by a minute. So what that means is that this particular metric, we collect memory usage every minute. Similar with CPU usage, we collect that every minute, and there are multiple CPUs. Next one up, Network tab. Now, you would expect to see a lot of panels for the Network tab because we do collect plenty of statistics for your interfaces. In the Network tab, you're gonna see the admin state versus the actual state, throughput information, receive, and transmit, as well as additional information about the interfaces, along with connection counts, NAT connections. I don't have any in my lab. And app table information. Now, for the app table, you can actually search for the IP address or MAC address of interest. High availability, one of my favorites. You see you get to see the state of your cluster, whether you required interfaces or up, and whether this particular node is an active member. By the way, you probably noticed that as I was, scrolling down, that the spinning cycle, what that means is that literally Grafana is pulling data from the Indeni server. The routing to dynamic protocols. And it's not just about the BGP peer states, but also we would display information like whether you have any active routes or hidden routes and OSPF, but in this case, I don't have OSPF configured in my lab. VPN tab consists of information about your permanent tunnels, as well as your dynamic tunnels. The services tab has information about logging, whether you're communicating with the logged server, DNS information, including DNS response times. The vendor specific tab has information about core dumps, kernel table entries, CA accessibility, secure Excel, plenty of information, as well as whether you have any kernel debug options enabled. Information about live manageability has information about SNMP configuration. Now, I actually also want to show you a brand new dashboard that we created for Checkpoint VSX, which is a lot of you has that in your environment. Let me show that to you, VSX. Now, the information you see for VSX Gateway is very similar to what you just looked at. The difference is that we decided to use two different dashboards to present the information. The main dashboard, which is what you're looking at here, consists of information that it's relevant to all your virtual systems. And we also have a sub-dashboard that would contain information that is only relevant to a particular virtual system. It's like you have a variable in addition to device. So for this, two virtual systems. So go ahead and select one of them and click on the VSX link. It will now go to the VSX sub-dashboard. Okay, the sub-dashboard contains information pertaining to only this particular virtual system. So you will see the CPU usage, the memory usage, CPU usage per core, per VS, interfaces that are used by this particular virtual systems, and routing information, very similar to what you just saw. Okay, at this point, let me pop the hood a little so that you can see what's really behind the scene. Okay, let's go back. Now, tabs, right? Great way to group information. If you don't like if you don't like our grouping, go ahead and create your own. Very easy to just go and create your own and then start moving widgets into the new tab that you just created. And let's take a look at the general setting. This is how you would name the dashboard and specify what refresh interfolds. But the one place that I want to show you is all the variables. Now, remember that variables are really ways to find the dashboard into your specific Grafana instance. So do not change these variables. And let's take a look at some of the panels. Let's pick a really simple one, OS version. Okay, when you look at what's behind the scene, first thing you notice that on the right pane, there's a lot of options for you to change the layout for the particular panel. Since this is such a simple one, there isn't much to change. We'll look at a different one and we'll go through, walk through the various options. But I do want to show you the actual query that Grafana sends to the Indeni server, and it looks something like this. So we're looking at a metric name, surprise, surprise, OS-version. And the corresponding query expression, this is how Grafana extracts the data from the JSON document. So let's take a look at one of the time series graphs. Let's pick memory usage. Okay, in order to draw a time series graph, obviously, like you're gonna need a timestamp, the actual value and all that good stuff. And let's walk through that. The query here, actual query, is looking for a metric called memory-usage. And for the query expression, as you would expect to see, that we are retrieving the actual points. If you mouse over, that's the actual value, the number, along with the timestamps and a tag. Tag here, literally these names here. So those are the fields that we are extrapolating. Now, if you want to look at the data frames, you can go and look at the actual table that, like you see the timestamps. And here you can actually see the actual value. That's what the data frames actually look like. On the, let's move over to let's go back to flip over to the graph view. On the right pane, again, I mentioned earlier that you can change the name of the panel description here is actually the tooltip. And whether you want to show tooltips and where you want to place the legends and whether you want annotations, there's plenty of options for you to change the layout. And you can go ahead and change that. You won't break anything. Now, so far, we've only looked at panels with a single metric. I mentioned earlier in the beginning that some of the panels you can actually have multiple metrics. And let's take a look at one. Concurrent connection is a good one to look at. First, that that it has two queries. And let's take a look. The first query, we are looking for a metric called concurrent connections limit. And the corresponding query expression, we are extracting the timestamps and the actual value. The second query, we're looking for a metric called concurrent connections and the corresponding query expression. Again, looking for the timestamp and the actual value. And in fact, you can actually, add as many queries and then combine into a single graph. That's pretty much all the that I have wanted to show you. Let me go back to the slide. Okay, roadmap. Now, so far we looked at a couple of device dashboards. We are also working on a composite dashboard, which provides you a system view where you can actually see status of all your devices. And from there, you can drill down to a specific device view. We're also working on a slightly different flavor dashboard, not so much about monitoring, but more like reporting along with, more like compliance type of reporting, whether you're compliant or even conforming to organization. We are also working on device dashboards for your management systems and of course other vendors. Now, the dashboard you looked at consists of the data that we're grabbing from our in-memory time series database that has 90 minutes worth of data. We also have a separate different database where we store long-term data up to a year. We're also working to grab information from that database so that you can actually do more interesting reporting from a long-term perspective. And let's wrap up questions. I do see a few. The first question. I guess the Grafana haven't been. So we do have device dashboard for Palo Alto devices. So I'm not familiar with, maybe Palo Alto Networks are also planning to do their own Grafana integration. I do know that Checkpoint has integration with Grafana. So maybe you can clarify for me with that, that question. Okay, next question. Can you show the plugin? Not sure what you mean by showing the plugin. The plugin is, it comes with Grafana. If, ping me afterwards and, I can walk you through, the specific plugin. Okay, let me see. There's another question. How does this compare to the Checkpoint Skyline monitoring solution? That's a really good question. That's, yeah, Checkpoint recently announced a new monitoring solution leveraging Prometheus as well as Grafana. So the difference. So to start with, the architecture is really different. With Skyline, you actually have to deploy a Prometheus agent in a checkpoint device. And in addition to the Grafana instance, you also need to have the Prometheus server. Because of the dependency with an agent, there is, I believe you need to run a fairly new version of checkpoints. Whereas with Indeni, because we don't have any agent dependency, you can actually use it for older version or older devices. On the metrics front, I gather that Skyline uses the information based on CP view. One of my customers actually told me that the information from Skyline is fairly basic. And whereas when he looked at the Indeni version, it's actually very comprehensive. That was his comment. And that's because we have hundreds of metrics. And I believe he mentioned that CP view or Skyline has approximately 60 metrics. And Indeni does cover a fair amount of use cases. Okay, there's more questions coming in. Can the Grafana software be run on the same server as the Indeni software, or should you use a separate server? Okay, great question. So we do recommend that you use a separate server. However, there's really no reason why you can't run it on the same server. When we first developed it, we actually had it in. It's like our recommendation is still like run it on the different server, because at the end of the day, you're using additional CPU cycles to pull information from the Indeni server. Okay, one more question. I run checkpoint firewalls. I run Grafana. What do I need to try out this Grafana checkpoint dashboard? Do you have a setup guide for this? Yes, I do. Okay, actually, that's a good time for me to get to that. So I'm going to be sending out the presentation along with the recording. And here you will see the setup. We actually have the setup guide as part of our online documentation. Oops. Let me just go back here. Right here. So that's actually, if you go to the indeni.com page, you will see that part 9 in there is actually where we have the step-by-step setup, how you set up the integration. So it's very straightforward. And then you also go to the Bitbucket and download the JSON file. So I'll be sending that out. And let me go back to the presentation for just one sec. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you're new to Indeni, there's a white paper that I strongly encourage you to read through. The setup and the links will be part of the presentation. I recommend this particular blog post because it does go into a little bit more information about the actual data, what the structure, what tools you can use. Pretty resourceful. And, questions? Oh, I think that's all the questions. With that, I want to thank you for joining me. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me directly. My email address, actually, it's easy if you just send it to product@indeni.com. Anytime you have questions or you have trouble running into the installation, feel free to reach out. Again, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.